What's up, you guys? I'm actually doing another show right now. It's, it's about, I'm actually doing another reaction show right now. So, let's get into it.
I was at home for 3 days for a mini stay at home vacation from work. I live in a very rural area, about an hour from the city. Honestly, I hadn't really taken these days off for any particular reason. Guess I was just feeling like I needed a break. It was on my first day off as I stayed at home and watched TV, among doing some other small things around the house. Around dinner time, though, a knock came from the front door. I sat up from the couch and looked at the clock, seeing it was 7 p.m. It was strange for anyone to be at my house in general, but given the time as well, it was even more so. I walked up to the door and cracked it open. A man was on the doorstep, smiling at me. He looked like any other guy, no special features or anything. "What do you need?" I asked, looking around behind him and noticing no car or truck in my driveway. The man maintained his smile as he went through a whole scenario he was in just a few minutes ago. He said he was on the road that connected to my driveway when someone slammed into his car and drove off, leaving him stranded and having to come to me for help. The way he described it, and just from looking at him, things didn't seem to add up. My driveway was far from the road, and the chances he got into an accident right by the entrance was almost zero on such an empty road. I told him I'd call the police for him if he'd like, but the man declined. He said he wanted to borrow my phone to call his wife. It took me a few seconds to respond, because being unsure about the situation made me nervous to say no to him. I said I would call the police and that was it, but the man's smile went away as he said don't worry about it and walked away from the porch. I closed the door, then looked out the window as the man walked down the driveway and disappeared in the dark. After a moment, I called the police just to be safe. About 20 minutes later, though, I got a call back from them saying there were no signs of any crashes on the road. I stayed up late that night, looking out the windows and just being overall a little bit uneasy. But once it got to around 12, I was too tired to stay up. I went upstairs to my bedroom and got ready, then got in bed and fell fast asleep.
I was 17 years old when I took over my family's small farm. Today, we farm over 15,000 acres and grow the
I remember waking up frantically, but not understanding why. Like maybe I'd heard something in my sleep, but didn't wake up fast enough to comprehend it. Looking over, it was about 3 a.m. I got up from my bed and walked over to the door so I could listen for any sounds in the rest of the house. It was mostly quiet, but I could hear a slight rustling sound from somewhere outside. I carefully walked down the stairs to check on it, thinking it was probably just a bush brushing against the house. But as I got to the downstairs hallway, I realized the sound was moving. It was going along the edge of the house and toward the front. I felt my heart start racing as I tried to reassure myself everything was okay. But then the rustling stopped, and only a moment later, there was a knock at the door. I stood still at the end of the hallway and stared at the front door, terrified of whoever was out there. After a few seconds, I moved away and up to a small window on the side of the house that had a view of the porch. Through the blinds, I could see two men, both in dark clothing, and both holding something in their hands. It looked like tools or weapons of some kind. My eyes widened in fear as I backed away and quietly walked back up to my room. More knocking echoed through the house as I called the police and locked myself in. As I stayed on the phone, the knocks turned into banging thuds. I immediately knew it was what I feared. They were trying to break the door down. Hit after hit, non-stop for over 5 minutes, they banged on the door, shaking the whole house. Then the operator on the phone finally said an officer was pulling up to my house, and at that same time, all the banging stopped. When the cop pulled up, though, he said he didn't see any men at my door. They must have run off just before he could see them. The door, however, was barely hanging on. The wood was bent and splintered, with only the bolt lock still in place. I was lucky that the police were able to show up quick enough, but I guess I was also smart to have not helped that one man. I'm assuming if I had, I would have only accelerated their plans to do whatever it was they were trying to do. Even today, though, I still worry about them coming back. A year ago, in midwinter, I was staying at an Airbnb on the east coast of the US. I had a family member that was sick, and I wanted to be nearby for a few weeks in case of any emergencies. While staying there, I figured I might as well make a vacation of it, since I'd really be doing nothing else. So the Airbnb I got was a modern cabin with a small lake behind it. Most of the area around was a forest as well, so it was really nice and a very different landscape from where I lived. Anyway, about a week after I'd gotten there, I rented out some camping equipment and thought it'd be nice to go out by the lake and maybe spend a night on the beach. The Airbnb was only a short walk away, if there was any trouble, so it wasn't really much of an adventure. I just wanted to lay out by the stars and clear my head, I guess. I made a few walks out to bring all the equipment, then set up the tent. It was actually really easy because it was made for beginners, so I had plenty of time to get everything else set up, as well as a rock circle for the campfire. Once that was all done, I kicked back and relaxed, sipping on a beer as I watched the sunset. The calm sound of the campfire, along with the forest, was something I'd missed, having lived in a big city for so many years. But maybe 20 or so minutes after the sun had set, I was caught off guard by a guy walking up to my campsite. I stood up as a natural reaction, but the man seemed to see my worriness as he stopped walking and put his hands up, apologizing for the scare. He was about the same age as me, mid-30s, but was very tall and skinny. I looked past him at the forest he came from. There was no path that I could see. It was just a bunch of trees that backed up to the lake. "Where did you come from?" The man made a short grin as he said he was just staying in a place on the other side of the lake and saw my campfire, so he thought he'd come out and have a beer with me. I gave a nervous smile, as that wasn't exactly a normal thing to do, way out in the middle of a forest, and on second thought, I was pretty sure there were no houses on the other side of the lake. "I'm actually not looking for company right now. Sorry," I said politely, hoping this could be a quick, harmless interaction. The guy seemed almost puzzled by my response, as his grin went down to a straight face. He glanced at the Airbnb that was behind me and stayed quiet. Then, after a few moments of silence, he said okay and walked back the way he came. I watched, trying to keep track of him to see where exactly he was walking to, but he faded out into the darkness of the woods without any flashlight. Feeling
Navan, it's the business travel platform that's taking the world by storm. Every employee can book their own flights and hotels. Everyone knows exactly what they can and can't expense. It's a whole
Feeling pretty unnerved, I decided to grab most of my stuff and haul it back to the Airbnb, not wanting to risk being outside with that guy around. Trying to carry everything at once, though, was a bad move on my part, exhausting me after only getting halfway to the house. And just as soon as I stopped for a breather, I heard heavy footsteps coming from the woods. I turned, seeing the man storming straight out of the tree line and right toward me with a look of insanity in his eyes. I dropped everything and tried to run, but immediately got knocked to the ground. From the speed he tackled me at, we both tumbled on the grass, and I somehow managed to get on my feet before he could get a hold of me again. The guy followed close behind, though, even close enough to grab my shirt a few times in an effort to stop me. When I got to the house, I knew I'd have no time to unlock the door, so I had to go straight for my car. I pulled the keys out of my pocket as I ran up to it, getting inside and locking it just before he got to the door. I turned it on and put it in reverse as the man slammed his fists into the window, shattering it with just a couple punches. He reached in and grabbed my arm as I backed up, swinging the front of the car in his direction. It must have caught him by surprise because he didn't move fast enough to get out of the way. All I saw was his body slam onto the ground and not get up as I drove away. I called for help immediately while I drove, wanting the police to get there quickly to get some answers out of him. But when they got there, the man was gone. All that was left were some shoe prints leading back into the woods.
That story is crazy.
When I was 14, my dad and I lived in a small studio apartment on Hollywood Beach in Florida.
Yo, all of these stories make you just think about how dangerous life can be. It really just do.
We didn't have hardly any money, but we treated ourselves to take out every other Thursday from the same Chinese place a few blocks away. They were family run, so the same guy came to deliver the food pretty much every time. We found out later he was the adult son of the woman who owned the restaurant. It was my job every other Thursday to answer the door and pay for the food, while my dad found something on TV for us to watch while we ate. He was short, with gray hair and glasses. I was friendly, but not talkative. At 14, I was still in my shy stage. We never had a conversation other than the typical hello and have a nice day. During that time, I was left alone a lot. Both my dad and I felt like 14 was old enough to spend a few hours home alone in the afternoons after school. I was also very close with the woman who lived next door and her goddaughter, so I would spend a lot of time over there when my dad wasn't home. I walked home from school as well, and it was one school day afternoon, an hour or so after I had gotten home, that the phone rang. This was around 2004, so having a house phone was still really common. Ours was set up at the side of the table in the main room of the studio apartment. I answered it, and for a second I thought there was going to be no one on the other end because there was a long pause, then a sort of stammering that I couldn't understand. Then, "This is Alan," which was barely understandable because of the heavy Asian accent. I say Asian because I'm not sure if it's okay to assume they were Chinese, just because they ran a Chinese restaurant. By now, you obviously know that Alan is the Chinese delivery guy, but at this point, 14-year-old me is confused. Who the hell is Alan? I say something along the lines of, what? And he clarifies, "Your delivery guy. Chinese delivery." Now I am even more confused. What does Alan the delivery guy want? He goes on, did you, order food? No, we did not, and I tell him so. He is quiet for another second or so. Then, "Are you home alone?" My heart dropped into my stomach. Now I'm pretty sure I know what Alan the delivery guy wants, and yes, I was home alone, but I wasn't about to let him know that. My first instinct was to tell him that my dad was home, but this wouldn't work because his work van wasn't outside. And I realized that Alan had been to our house enough over the last few years to know my dad's van, and if he drove by, he would know he wasn't home. My uncle is here, I say, and immediately I think it's a horrible attempt at a lie, and Alan is going to know that. Why? I challenge him. He's quiet again for a moment, then a statement, not a question. You are home alone. I am stunned and I have no idea what to say now as I'm trying to think of something. Never mind, he says and hangs up.
As an esthetician of several years, I was really struggling with my schedule until I discovered Gloss Genius software, and they have helped me manage my schedule so much better. So here are my 5 favorite scheduling hacks to save you a ton of hours during the week. Set up the wait list.
I'm so weirded out and scared at this point that even though part of me thinks I actually scared him out of whatever he had planned, another part of me says go lock all of the doors. So I do, front and back. By the time I get to the front room, from locking the back door, I look out the front window and I see a car parked in the driveway. It's Alan, just sitting in his car. The windows are rolled up and lightly tinted, but I can see him behind the steering wheel, just staring at my door. 30 seconds later, the house phone starts ringing again. I don't answer it. Alan stays parked in the driveway for about 5 more minutes. I stood looking out the window the whole time, thinking to myself that the second he got out of the car, I was going to grab a knife from the kitchen. Such a dramatic young woman I was. The house phone starts to ring one last time. I don't answer it. As soon as it stops ringing the second time, I pick it up and dial 911. I was terrified. Not only because of Alan, but I was afraid my dad was going to be angry with me for calling the police. It is a completely different story, but he and the law have not always been on the same side, and I was raised with a sort of subliminal aversion to the police and the idea that anything I couldn't handle myself, my dad could handle for me. Alan drove away while I was on the phone with the 911 operator. I was in the middle of telling her he was calling the house and parked in the driveway when he just put the car in reverse and sped down the street. The police took a statement from me when they got to my house, then sent me next door to hang out with a neighbor and her goddaughter. We sat on the front porch and I told her the story of what happened while the officers went down to the restaurant to talk to Alan and contact my dad. In the end, Alan was able to get off with a warning by telling the officers that there was a confusion and he thought that we had ordered food, which his mother confirmed. When asked why he wanted to know if I was home alone, he said he was trying to get an adult on the phone. The police told them that they will have to make someone else make deliveries to customers in my area from now on, and to make sure that Alan keeps his distance. In all honesty, I think it was my dad's phone call to the restaurant later that really made Alan realize he had screwed up, and not the warning from the cops. He was fuming when I told him the story, as I imagine most fathers would be. He called the restaurant and spoke to the woman who owned the place first, then somehow convinced her to put Alan on the phone. What followed was one of the greatest conversations I have ever heard, even if it was only my dad's side I was hearing. Nothing makes you feel more loved than your dad in macho protection mode. My dad threw insults that I have never even heard of before, and I was in middle school, a kingdom of insult connoisseurs. I knew it was a very serious situation, and I knew that my dad was really angry, but I was in the background stifling laughter into a pillow. At one point, my dad asked Alan what the hell he was thinking for driving over here, to which Alan responded something about being lonely, and my dad said, "If I ever catch you on the street again, Alan, if I even hear that you were near this street, I will make sure that you are lonely for the rest of your life." Stop eating from that restaurant after that.